Day 11 of the 2024 U.S. Championships saw Fabiano Caruana win his final round and repeat as the U.S. champion for the third year in a row. This is Caruana's fourth overall title as he wins the first place prize of $55,000 along with the $7,000 clear first place bonus prize. Taking a look at the results from today's final round, Caruana entered the day with a half-point lead over Awonder Liang. Awonder would end up losing, however, to Leinier Dominguez, effectively clinching the title for Caruana. But Caruana would go on to defeat Shankland regardless, as he finishes on 7 points. Also winning was Levon Aronian, who defeated Oparin to join a large tie for second place. So Caruana finishes in first with 7, and we have a surprising 6-way tie for second place with Robson, Liang, Dominguez, Sevian, Aronian, and Niemann all ending with 5.5 points, with Robson and Liang taking second and third place on tiebreaks. In the U.S. Women's Championship, Carissa Yip had already clinched the title going into today's round, but second place was still to be decided between Alice Lee and Begim Tokhirjonova. Lee would draw with Yip, while Begim would defeat Tatev Abrahamyan to secure clear second place. The final standings will see Carissa Yip in first with 8.5 points, Begim in second with 7.5, and Lee in clear third with 7. Going into today's games, we'll start with the game between Caruana and Shankland, which featured an open Sicilian and a Najdorf with bishop to g5. So definitely a very, very sharp opening. This one was quite complicated right from the get-go. Queen b6, knight b3, queen back to c7, as both sides start to develop their pieces in more or less thematic fashion. This one saw a very, very complicated middle game as Shankland starts pushing his h-pawn down the board. h3 from Caruana, now rook to h5, the bishop drops back. And here the engine was saying that black should actually go ahead and play g5 here. White's idea was probably to put the bishop on h2, and then even play for ideas like g4, h takes g4, and rook to g5, where it seems like black is getting a lot of activity here. Instead, Shankland played knight to e5 and rook back to h8. But now queen to d2, bishop to g5, and f6, likely the start of some of black's issues in this game as black weakens the e6 square long term. Caruana brings the bishop back, knight to c4, trades on c4 and f3. And here the character of the game definitely changes as white starts slowly piling on and putting pressure on some of black's weaknesses. So we see king f7, white doubling up on the d file here, b3, knight back to e2, and now c4, establishing a Marazzi bind type of structure here, knight to c3. And at this point, white is actually doing quite well, as black doesn't have a lot of counterplay, and white is ready to target the b6 pawn. So here, Fabi goes for knight to e2. Black has to play b5, and now takes, and bishop to b6, hitting the rook, rook to c6, and a5. And white establishes a bit of an edge here. Shankland decides to actually sacrifice the exchange, a very reasonable decision according to the engines, in order to get a bishop and a pawn for the rook, and still very, very solid formation for black in the center, albeit somewhat passive. Knight a4, queen a7, knight to b2 here, as Caruana starts maneuvering the knight around over to d3. And at this point, Shankland makes a key mistake with rook to c8. He should have played the move knight to h5, just avoiding the trade, keeping black's knight active and eyeing the g3 square. According to the engines, black has very, very decent compensation here. Instead, we saw rook to c8, but now white can take on f4, g takes f4, and if queen takes f4, there is e5, winning the second piece, although apparently this is also quite nice for white. After queen takes h4, white can get a lot of activity here. But Caruana goes a simpler way. He just drops the queen back to e1, and now it's very difficult for black to defend the h-pawn, as you don't really want to go rook to h8. Then your rook is very passive here, and soon white is going to start using the extra exchange. For example, rook c2, rook c1, and the rook can invade on c7. So here white's advantage turns decisive as black goes e5, knight f5, takes, and queen to d7. Shankland's idea is that on queen takes h4, he can at least grab the f5 pawn. But now white switches gears, plays queen e4 instead, holding on to this pawn, and black just doesn't have any real compensation for the exchange anymore, as the bishop on e7 is very passive here. So Caruana's technique is quite good. He picks up the b pawn. Now he can start running his own b pawn up the board, as black looks for any kind of counterplay he can get with the rook, but of course white covers everything here, and he slowly advances the b pawn forward. Now queen to b1, b6, rook to b3, queen f5, nice move hitting the f pawn, king to g7, and rook a5. Forced resignation, as this rook is heading to a7 with deadly effect, as white will soon be giving mate on the 7th rank. So technically Caruana had already became the champion by default before this game had finished, as Awonder had already lost his game to Dominguez, meaning no one would be able to catch Fabi in the end. But nevertheless, with this win, he does cement his 3rd straight title in the US Championship and his 4th overall. Taking a look at the other key game of the day between Awonder, Liang, and Dominguez, Awonder definitely was playing this game all out for the win, as with a win he could possibly catch up to Caruana in the standings and force a tiebreak. I should note, by the way, this game started with 1-A3 in the decisive round of the US Championship, so definitely Awonder showed up today in a very combative mood. Eventually they end up getting this kind of Jobava London type of position, and although black was all right out of the opening, Awonder does get some initiative here after Dominguez's decision to go knight d4, rook c3, as now white goes e5, attacking the knight on f6, leaving this knight unprotected as there's bishop takes h7 tactics. And now white gets a very, very nice French-like structure. So queen d8, rook to a1, g6, bishop to d2, and Awonder had a very, very nice positional advantage here, playing this move g4, not an easy move to make, but restricting the knight on g7. And for the most part, Dominguez had a very, very hard time getting anything going in this position, as white was just holding on to his grip on d4 and looking to slowly press forward on the king side. But Awonder wasn't really able to make a ton of progress in this one. I was looking here after bishop e8, instead of bishop to f2, maybe taking on f5 would have been the way to go, with the idea knight f5, bishop takes f5. Let's say if g f5, then e6 is hanging, but if e takes f5, then rook f3, for example, rook to g3, followed by h4, h5, and white is building up the pressure and has a big, big advantage. However, Awonder goes bishop to f2 and ends up putting his bishop on g3 here, which gives black some serious counterplay that Dominguez soon pounces on. He now goes bishop to e8, queen to d3, and very unfortunate move by white here, as now Dominguez finds a fantastic shot g5. And his point is that his bishop can finally break free and come alive via the g6 square. If white takes on g5 here, then black's idea would be to go bishop to g6, and everything is hanging on the diagonal. If white takes on f5, then black's idea would be to take on d4 first. After queen takes d4 and knight takes f5, black is going to take on g3 and then take on f4. The bishop is coming to g6, and it's black's pieces that are actually super, super active here, and black is coming out on top. So Awonder tries rook to f1, but bishop to g6, queen d2, takes on d4, now takes on g4, opening up an attack against the rook. White goes rook to c1, but bishop e4 check, knight to f5. All of black's pieces springing into life here. Queen takes b6, but now black takes on g3, takes on e6 with check, king h8 takes, g takes f4, and white ends up resigning here as his king is just completely opened up. If he plays rook takes f4, for example, black is winning by force after rook takes c3, rook takes c3, king takes g4, for example, otherwise you're losing this rook, and then queen to g7 check, and white's king is getting hunted down here. King h5, bishop to g6, and then queen h6 is coming, and it's all over. So very, very nice comeback win by Dominguez. With this win, he actually gets himself into that huge six-way tie for second place. Moving on to the U.S. Women's Championship, this key game between Carissa Yip and Alice Lee ended up being a little bit anticlimactic, as Carissa had already clinched the title leading up to going into today's round, and was no longer in contention for the perfect 11-0 score. So not a ton to play for Carissa in this game, as of course she already won the tournament. So she takes it a very, very solid approach in today's game against Alice's Petrov defense, just going for the early end game. And I'll show you folks the full game here, but wasn't a ton of action as white keeps it very, very solid. Eventually trading rooks on the e-file, and yeah, just keeping it very, very equal for the most part. Eventually we see a couple of trades here of the minor pieces, and then black goes knight to g5 here, white takes, and we get opposite color bishops, and a draw was soon found by repetition. So a draw, definitely reasonable result for both sides. Carissa finishes the tournament with an extra half point, 8.5 points wide ahead of the field, winning her 3rd overall title and her 2nd one in a row. Alice finishes with a draw with black, which may have been good enough for 2nd place if not for Begim Tokhirjonova winning this final round game against Tatev Abrahamyan. So this game ended up being very, very decisive as Begim starts with e4. We see a French winner variation, e5, c5, a3, and now this rare move, bishop to a5. And this one was very, very sharp right out of the gate after b4, takes on d4, queen to g4. I believe this is some known theory where white is hitting the g-pawn, king f8, and now knight to b5. And yeah, very, very double-edged position here out of the opening, as black's king is certainly weak on f8, but at the same time, black does get some pawns and a lot of counterplay in the center. So here we see big move g5, white takes on g5, black takes on e5, now knight takes d4. Material ends up equal here, with black having a very strong center, but king on f8 definitely feeling vulnerable. So knight g6, queen drops back to d2, e5, knight to b3, bishop to e6. Both sides start developing here. h5, a4, h4, rook to g1. However, takes. It's not clear if the opening of the h-file ends up helping black, as Tatev now plays knight to h6, but now a5, bishop c7, knight to c5, and white here ends up getting a pretty serious advantage. I think instead of knight h6, black was better suited to play rook to c8, with idea a5, bishop c7, knight c5. Here, black could play bishop to d6. The point being, in the game, with black's knight being on h6 here, white would have the additional resource rook to h1, which is very, very uncomfortable for black with ideas of bishop h3. Whereas here, of course, rook h1 is not possible. So very, very tough position, as after a5, black finds themselves in a lot of trouble. Knight to c5, Tatev decides to sacrifice the b-pawn, but now white takes this one, pushes a6, and Begim here just starts pushing her queenside pawns. c4 now comes in, taking advantage of the pin on the d-file. Black goes rook c8, rook c1, and d4, looking to use these pawns in the center of the board. But white's pawns on the queen side just seem to arrive faster. So we get c5, c6. Now bishop to h3, hitting this diagonal. Black goes bishop a6. We see a trade of bishops here. But now queen to d3, knight e7, and bishop a3, fighting for the f5 square on the king side. e4 played by Tatev in order to just create some more counterplay against white's king. But queen takes d4, rook to d8, sacrificing the exchange now. But takes, Begim grabs the pawn on a7, and black doesn't get quite enough counterplay here. Check, queen h3 check, knight to g2. This was the last interesting moment here. Knight to g4 could have made things rather tricky for white, who would have to find queen takes e7 check here in order to win the game. Grabbing the knight with check is not so hard, but then after king to g8, for example, black is threatening some serious counterplay with knight h2 check and queen to g4. White would have to find queen takes d8, sacrificing the queen, and then playing a7 in order to win in the most straightforward way. Otherwise, the game could be rather unclear. Instead, we saw knight to f5 in the game, defending the knight on e7, but not giving black enough initiative. So white now takes on e7, knight takes g3, white takes this one as well, queen f5 check, knight to f4, and black just doesn't have enough attackers to hunt down white's king. Knight comes back to e2, rook to d5, bishop to d6, opening up the queen, king g6, rook h1, and this was the end of the game, as now white is setting up a mating attack with queen h7 check, and black just doesn't have any counterplay left in the position. Rook f5 check, for example, white can play bishop to f4. The checks quickly run out and white is winning. So very nice win by Begim as she secures clear second place in the U.S. Women's Championship. Well, folks, that does it for the 2024 U.S. Chess Championships. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recapping it. Coming up next is the Champions Showdown Chess 9LX, which starts October 27 of this month, starting with the Ultimate Moves exhibition event. Should be a lot of fun, and hopefully I'll be back here again for the recaps. Until then, take care.